Thank you all again for your patience as we work through the technology in order to provide this important information from our state representatives. Thank you all again for your patience. Now I didn't even mute myself elsewhere. The technology in order to provide this. There we go. It's about a 15-second delay, Representative Craddick and Landgraf, just so you know, between the broadcast and actually speaking. So now that I've muted my other screen, I apologize for that. Thank you both, Representative Craddick and Representative Landgraf, for joining us today. The way we'll handle this portion of the presentation, we're going to give Representative Craddick about 10 minutes or so to lay forward his what he's seeing for the Permian Basin, his thoughts and agenda this legislative session, and then we'll give Representative Landgraf that opportunity as well. So Representative Craddick, if you would please start, sir. Thank you very much.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, and Brooks and I both appreciate y'all taking your time to do this. We're sorry you can't come to the Capitol and do this, but we're working the best we can. The work of both chambers are important to our community and businesses. In the past, chambers have come down and had some type of activities down here at Midland, Odessa, or Odessa Midland Day, whatever you want to do it. I think it worked well, and people who came down had an excellent opportunity to visit with us, see the Capitol, and talk about the issues. This session, I'm on energy resources, which I've been on for years, and land and resource management that has oil and gas bills in there, and the eminent domain, which is a big factor for us in West Texas and all across our area, and calendars, which is the committee that sets what bills we vote on the floor, and the level that we do that. So priorities this session, Brooks and I both have the GROW bill again, which is a bill that sends funds back to energy producing areas of the whole state. We passed it 2 years ago in the House. I think we got 120 some votes. You needed 100 or 2/3 vote, and then it didn't pass the Senate. So I'm not sure what that noise is. I don't know if that's coming through or not on your all side, but so anyway, that'll help in areas like ours where additional road money and things of this nature to help us in the oil fields. And I think it'll be, well, we know every session X amount of dollars are going to be available to give to the different parts of the industry to help us move forward. Next, of course, is redistricting, and my goal in redistricting is to keep Midland and Odessa together in a congressional district and a state senate district. And then I'll obviously have a state representative district, which I have today. Brooks will do the same in his. We'll have a district that's different. And both of our districts are going to be very close to the number that you need for a legislative district. So we don't have the census data yet back yet. It's usually due by the 1st of April. I think we'll be lucky to get it by the 1st of October this year. But anyway, so whenever we get it, we'll be able to move on with redistricting. The only thing we really can do in redistricting that we're working on, that actually I'm doing, is the appellate courts. We're looking at doing a separate bill, and you don't need the census for that. Basically, it's done by the number of cases in these areas when you put the districts together. In fact, the Senate, I think, is getting ready to pass one pretty quickly. Budget's a big factor. Obviously, our numbers have been cut back because of COVID and loss of oil and gas money is coming back, and so there's a big change in that. But the budget is still something we've got to do, and there's going to be some shortfalls. Maybe we expect some stimulus dollars to the state to make up for that. Second Amendment rights being looked at heavily all over the country, and we're no different in this state. Broadband for rural areas was voted out of state affairs in the House today, And it's something we desperately need for the rural areas. And we've got a lot of different things going on, obviously, in the rural areas, and the broadband will help us tremendously. And then the protection of the Permian Basin, is vital to the economy of not only the Permian Basin, but to the state, to make sure that we don't have any of the federal bills that they're looking at passing up there. Some states are then trying to adopt those on the state level, and we will try to prevent that from happening at our level. Also, protecting our electric grid. As you know, we have our own electric grid, and so we're looking at the mapping of the critical infrastructure right now in this session, and expect to see multiple pieces of legislation having to do with electricity, with the storm we had, and with the shutdown of electricity across the state. So that's kind of what the priorities are in our district and across the Permian Basin. And so I'll be glad to try and answer any questions you might have.
Representative Landgraf, are you still here with us?
Yes, I'm still here.
He's off the screen on mine, so.
Well, while we're waiting for him to come back, I know one of the things that we'd like to hear. There we are.
He's back on mine, at least. Yeah.
All right. Representative Landgraf, what priorities are you seeing in this session, and what can you add to Representative Craddick's comments there?
Well, not too much to add to what Speaker Craddick had to offer. I mean, no surprise. The priorities that we have for the Permian Basin are extraordinarily similar. Let me just start by saying I appreciate that the Midland Chamber, the Odessa Chamber, for putting this together. Like Speaker Craddick, I'm disappointed that we're not able to do this in person this session as we normally do, but the level of engagement that this event creates is really good. It's really important, and it certainly makes our jobs as legislators easier when we have such an engaged constituency like this. So really appreciate y'all putting this together, and certainly appreciate the invitation to be able to participate. Like everything else in life for the last year, the legislative session has been significantly impacted by the pandemic, and that's something that we've been having to work around. And candidly, it's resulted in a slower start to the legislative session than normal. But I think here in the last couple of weeks, we've really hit our stride and have the legislative process has really kicked into high gear, and it's very exciting. As far as what priorities we have, I think at the start of any legislative session and going into any legislative session, it's important to have an overarching goal. And for me, that's always that we want to keep Texas the best place in America to live, to work, and raise a family. And specifically, we want to make sure that Midland, Odessa, and the Permian Basin are making our contribution by doing what we do best to that Texas miracle. But then also we want to make sure that we are a fair partner in every sense of the word for the state of Texas. So we do so much to produce for Texas, and we want to make sure that the state makes an investment in our region the way that I think that we all deserve. And I think we can all certainly agree on that. As far as some of the specific priorities, they're very similar to what Speaker Craddick has laid out, so I don't want to repeat myself too much. I will go into a few specifics. In terms of energy, we have to, again, we're the goose that lays the golden egg for the state of Texas with our prolific ability to produce oil and gas. Thanks to the good work that's been done in the legislature for decades now, we have a very good regulatory environment. We don't want to do anything to harm that. Of course, there is some concern that there may be additional regulations coming down from Washington that may inhibit our ability to do what we do best. And so we're working on a bill called the Texas Energy Independence Act that's already had a hearing in committee that would make sure that if there's any unnecessary regulation coming from the federal government, that we're not going to dedicate state or local resources to inhibit that ability. I think it's something that's gotten quite a bit of traction. And I know that it must be doing something right, because there are quite a few activist types here in Austin who don't like it. So I think that's probably a good sign that it's what we need to be doing to make sure that we can continue to be a leader in energy production. Aside from that, there are issues that we always have to make sure that we're tackling, particularly when it comes to education and transportation. And let me talk briefly about those. During the last session, we passed a historic school finance reform bill, House Bill 3, that really invested in public education across the state. We want to make sure that we keep that momentum going. And so I think that does seem to be a priority for just about everybody in the legislature, myself included. But there is one grim reality, and that is that the pandemic forced our Texas school children out of school, and we've relied on virtual learning. In some cases, that's good. In other cases, it's not. But to the extent that there has been learning loss across the state, we need to make sure that we make up for that, because that's something that we can do, and quite frankly, our Texas school children deserve it. So we want to make sure that that we're bringing everybody, all of our students up to speed, so that this pandemic doesn't set them back in their education. And as you all know, if you lose time in that educational attainment, it's very difficult to make it up. So we're trying to make up for that ground as quickly as possible. And the reality is that takes some money, and the Appropriations Committee is working to make sure that gets done, and I fully support that. Transportation is huge for us in the oil patch. Again, this session, I'm serving on the Transportation Committee, and we're continuing to work with leaders at TxDOT to make sure that we fulfill a Permian promise, to make sure that we make the proper investments in our infrastructure. I'm 100% supportive of Speaker Craddick's measure to HJR 82. I appreciate his leadership on that. That will be a very important piece of the puzzle on transportation and on education and broadband. Again, he's outlined those issues very well. Those are very important, and I'm very supportive of it. And then Speaker also mentioned, look, it's clear that we need to make sure we take steps to strengthen the grid, the electric grid in Texas, make reforms rather at ERCOT, and the Texas House of Representatives is well underway in our effort to do that. I think that's something that the people of Texas are demanding, rightly and rightfully so, and that's something that we are working diligently to deliver on with a series of bills that were passed out of committee last week. But we have to make sure that what happened in that middle week in February never happens again in Texas. Lastly, something that hits home for us in the Permian Basin is an active shooter alert system bill that I introduced that has made its way through the committee process. This is in response to the tragic mass shooting that we experienced in our communities on August 31st, 2019. Working with so many of the families of some of the victims of that shooting, one thing that there seemed to be a consensus on was, look, we need to have an alert system, kind of like an Amber Alert, in the event that there's another mass shooting of that type. We think that that's, by having that in place, by working with DPS and local law enforcement, that's a way that we can save lives without infringing on the rights of law-abiding Texans. And so that's something that we've also made quite a bit of progress on, and something that I'm very excited about. As Speaker Craddick can tell you, there are 1,000 issues that we have to deal with, so we're really just scratching the surface. But I think those are the priorities, or some of the priorities that we have that are particularly important for us in the Permian Basin. So I'll press pause there before I start rambling on too much. But again, appreciate the invitation to be here, and I'm looking forward to any questions that the group may have.
Excellent. Well, thank you again both for being here. I know one question, obviously, had we been able to come to Austin, this would be an opportunity for many of our member constituents to reach out to your offices, reach out to other individual representatives and senators who might be on a committee where there is a bill that the individual member cares about. So maybe both of you could give us a little bit of a picture of what the session mechanically looks like and some of those changes, and if there's a bill important to us, how what a committee hearing might look like as opposed to what we're used to.
All right. Who do you want to go first? It doesn't matter. Brooks, you want to go first? It's fine with me. Go ahead.
Oh, well, so I would say that a big, so just because of the pandemic and certain restrictions, things have actually loosened up at the Capitol in terms of access a little bit more. And one thing that we've been careful to do is, if you want to come and testify on a bill, we consider this Capitol building to belong to the people of Texas, because it does. And this is where the people's work gets done. And so if you're a Texan and you want to weigh in on a bill, there is no restriction for you to come and testify, and we certainly welcome that. But knowing that some people may not be comfortable doing that right now for health concerns, one way that the legislative process has been opened up in a way that it hasn't historically, primarily because for a long time technologically it wasn't possible, but the House of Representatives has set up a public comment portal where you can go online, and I'll see if we can get the link and put it in the chat here. But any bill, any measure that you want to weigh in on, if you're for it, if you're against it, if you have a suggestion for improving the bill, you can log in and type anything that you want about that particular bill. And then when that bill is pending in a committee, the committee members will have access to those comments. It becomes basically part of the public record. So it's a way to testify and let your voice be heard in a way that has not been possible before. So I think that's the biggest accommodation that we've made to help accommodate Texans amid the concerns surrounding the pandemic.
Right. Let me comment. We had our first calendar yesterday that we had this session. Obviously, it's kind of been bogged down a little bit with the problems with the COVID and everything else that we've had in the last few months. But we are seeing that we're going to meet today and set another calendar for next week. And so I think things are picking up. We're seeing more people in the Capitol than you have in months. I mean, there were the first couple of months of the session, there was nobody in the hallways and no one around. And you're seeing more people now, and people are feeling more comfortable with coming to the Capitol. I saw a couple of school groups yesterday going through, and you haven't seen those hardly at all. At least I haven't. I don't know if books have or not, but you haven't seen that. So, I've had a lot more people call up and wanting to know exactly what your question asked. How do we participate? I think Brooks did a good job. You've got the opportunity. Still go to the committees, and I just got through going to one on a bill a while ago, and they had space so far apart and all that. It's still there, and they had an extra room. It's called State Affairs, one of the committees we have in the House. There are a lot of people, so the opportunities really opened up for people to say what they want and to pass that on to us. And I think we both feel like that we need your input on legislation, no matter whether it's bills we've introduced or someone else has introduced. If everybody knew everything about every bill, we would need the legislature. So I think that's there, and I know we both welcome your inputs. I think as far as you're asking, we'd love to have more input. And I'm sorry you're not here. I think it always gives people, I don't know, a little better feeling about what they're doing and talking to or participating when they're here. They can go to generally the old Supreme Court rooms where we have kind of question and answers, and visit there and ask questions and walk through the Capitol and go to our offices and see what they're like, and then just see everything from the Bullitt Museum down, just to see what it looks like down here. So Sean, that kind of, I think.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Question pretty well between the two of us here.
I think so, and thank you very much. And I know personally, I told Representative Craddick this in backstage as we were waiting. I'm looking forward to Austin in 2023 as opposed to Zoom here in 2021. So another question we got, and I know that we've touched on it, and I'm actually, because of the committee assignments, I'll let Representative Landgraf start here as well. As to redistricting, really, we've got a couple of questions. The first is the change in the timeline that we might see because of the delay in getting numbers from the census, and how to handle that. And so what we're going to see timeline-wise there, as well as your thoughts on how it might impact the districts that we have at the state, as well as our potential U.S. congressional representation.
Well, so I'm very honored to be able to serve on the redistricting committee. This is the first time that I've had that assignment, and as Speaker Craddick alluded earlier, it's critically important for West Texas. We're both fond of, so Speaker Craddick and I are two of only 16 state representatives whose districts are between the I-35 corridor and the El Paso County line. So that's 16 of us out of 150 members of the Texas House of Representatives. Of course, all of our districts are based on population, and so we as much as we grow in the Permian Basin, it's difficult for us sometimes to keep pace with the larger metropolitan areas where there's just explosive population growth. To answer your question, before I get into some of those details, as far as the timeline for redistricting has been delayed, no surprise due to the pandemic. Normally, the Census Bureau conducts the census in the last or first year of the decade, depending on how you look at it. So in 2020, that was done, but because of the pandemic, it took a little bit longer than usual to gather that data. And we would have normally have expected to receive all of the data from the U.S. Census Bureau by the end of the year. And then when we started the legislative session in January, we would have had that data to work with. Because of the delays, we're basically expecting two sets of data. The first set will just tell us the official number of people who now reside in the state of Texas. We're going to get that data, or we're expected to anyway, as soon as next month. And so that will be the first big step into telling us what exactly we're working with. However, there has to be a more specific data set that actually tells us where those people reside within the state of Texas. And that's what we actually need to draw legislative boundaries, both whether it's for the Texas House, the Texas Senate, or the U.S. Our U.S. congressional delegation. So that data, as Speaker Craddick alluded to earlier, we're supposed to receive it no later than September 30th, but we really can't complete the work of redistricting until we receive that. So with our legislative session ending in May, we're likely to be back in the almost certain to be back to finalize the redistricting process in this fall, probably in October at the earliest. Speaker Craddick and I were talking, I think, Mr. Speaker, correct me if I'm wrong, at the end of 2019, and we were looking at what Midland County and Ector County and some of the other counties in the Permian Basin we were projected to actually have population growth that was either on pace or exceeding the statewide population growth trends, which actually would have allowed us in the Permian Basin to actually lose some of the counties that we could have given to other West Texas representatives. With the changes that we've seen throughout 2020, again, primarily due to the pandemic, that population growth may have changed. What I'm curious to see is when the pandemic hit and when oil prices dropped, did those workers have some other place to go? And if not, then it's fairly likely that a lot of them could have stayed in the Permian Basin and were counted in the census. But if there was kind of a mass exodus, then that could have a negative impact on our ability to keep as many of these West Texas districts intact. So anyway, it will be very interesting to see how that data plays out. But it's a data-driven process, and we're certainly looking forward to getting that. But the end goal is to make sure that we work within the law to make sure that West Texas continues to have the strongest voice possible based on the way that the districts are drawn.
Okay, let me make a couple of quick comments. Brooks did a great job, but I think one thing we need to think about is the congressional wise. Congressional is kind of different than the Texas House, the Texas Senate, and the appellate courts. So congressional, we're projected at this point, and here again, we won't know until we get the final number. Two new congressmen for sure, and possibly three, I think is what the guesstimate is right now. And so I don't know where those will go, obviously, but it'll help us hold our own congressionally. It's about all we'll do. We're not going to get an extra congressional district in West Texas. We'd be lucky to hold our own. And so that's one key thing, and that's a big factor for us. And then in the Texas House, you can't split county lines. And so that's going to makes a big difference from where it used to be, where you'd have a lot of the small counties be split up and attached to the larger counties throughout the state and really dilute the representation that was in the smaller counties. And you can't do that anymore by the court case from the Supreme Court that eliminated that. And then in the Senate here again, we will have 31 senators as well. We'll have 150 House members. But in the Senate, we're hoping to keep Midland and Odessa together. I think both of us before that, and congressional wise too. I think it's important to do that, and that's for Midland and Odessa to actually have a voice in these districts, because if you start splitting up that population, you can split congressional counties by congressional districts. And so hopefully we'll see that West Texas, that doesn't happen. And we'll continue to have togetherness on Midland and Odessa, because the two cities together is the largest part of our congressional district. I guess San Angelo would be next, I guess. But it's important for us to have the representation, and by that population we get that. And then the other thing that there is, and this is important, and we actually changed this a couple years ago, in the appellate courts, Midland and Odessa were in with El Paso a few years ago, and we moved Midland and Odessa to be in to what we call a more rural district out there in Eastland. And so I think everybody I've talked to want to see us stay basically in that rural district for the appellate. I don't know, Brooks, I think that's what I'm hearing. I don't know what you're hearing. But I think that's important to us. And it's, like I said earlier, it's not done by census, so we might do that redistricting part. We could do it during the session this year. In fact, there was at one point there was talk about doing it during the emergency period. We didn't get all the stuff put together. So redistricting is really a big factor. We only do it every 10 years. We did not do the appellate courts the last time, so it'll be 20 years that we'll be looking at. And as Brooks mentioned on the House, our seats look like they shouldn't change much. In fact, originally we did. He and I talked about this. We each might lose some counties. And now, I don't know, who knows whether the population was exited or not, as you question. I think from Midland's population base, I mean, we saw a burst of houses on the market. You probably saw the same. But now I think that's slowed down, and I think our school population, unless it's changed, and always changes when we get into the sessions of school. I think our population growth in the schools has increased. So hopefully we're pretty well stay along. Okay.
Well, thank you very both. The work of redistricting doesn't come up often, but it makes such a difference to our congressional representation, as well as the makeup of the Texas House and Texas Senate. I know one question that we've gotten a lot from individual members relates to broadband. particularly as we've seen so many school districts all of them get thrown into online learning. As we sit here today via a platform to do exactly this sort of remote informational session. I know both of you touched on it, and former Speaker Craddick, will start with you, please, sir. Can you elaborate on sort of the broadband push that we're making, particularly for out here in West Texas?
Well, I think that there's been a push the last several years to try and get more broadband available out there. Actually, I think the winter storm we had and the freeze and all this even saw more of a push out in the rural areas. And, a lot of people talk about, why didn't he do this or why didn't he do that out in the oil fields? I mean, they didn't have the availability to do that. And so I think there's a big push from that aspect, as well as just the need across the line. And I think that the needs there for education, as you mentioned, Sean, a minute ago, I think that it may end up the only way a lot of these students are going to get an education through broadband. And we've got to take care of these rural areas because we're having unbelievable growth we have had before the COVID situation, all that started. But I think it's coming back. And so it's a real necessity. And I think you're seeing a big push, not only here, but in East Texas, there's a huge push for it. But they need the same thing we need. I don't know who needs more. I'm not getting into that, but I'm just saying we both need it. And we're two of the major areas that need it. So I think it's one of the major factors. I know the governor used it in his speech when he addressed the legislature as one of his priorities. I saw Lieutenant Governor Patrick put out, I think it was 31 priorities. It may have been different. I think that was 31, and it was on that list. And I know the speaker also is advocated for. So I think you'll see something done, and it'll be positive in the broadband area.
Representative Landgraf?
I agree 100% with Speaker Craddick. It's the winter storm, the pandemic have exposed some of our weaknesses as a state as it relates to our broadband connectivity. I mean, what we're doing this morning is a good example of why it's increasingly important. But I mean, yes, it's a technology issue, but more than that, it's a healthcare issue as we increasingly rely on telemedicine and telehealth. But also it's an education issue, and it's a commerce issue. People's livelihoods and children's education are increasingly relying on broadband access, and so it's almost more like a utility than anything else. And I think that's why we're seeing such a push. But it's importance really can't be understated, and I think Speaker Craddick summed it up very well. And I join him in supporting the effort.
Thank you both, and it truly is something that came to the front because of COVID in the last year. One of the comments that we had was work on passage of so-called Daniel's Law and protecting certain public servants and their information in order to protect them individually. But on a broader picture, with the time that we have left, I know Representative Landgraf, you brought up a potential alert system. We've gotten some questions about sort of gun rights and weapons rights generally. So what are your thoughts, and I'll start with you, Representative Landgraf, on that appropriate balance between Second Amendment rights and public safety, and how to balance sort of that, what is a very difficult situation?
Sure. Well, no, and that's always a conversation that takes place after we've had a tragic mass shooting, and unfortunately, our communities have been added to the growing list of communities that have been plagued by terrible acts of mass violence. The response, what I'm proud of is that so in terms of gun rights, we can't infringe on the constitutional rights of law-abiding Texans. We've taken oaths of office to uphold the Constitution, and so that's something that we take very seriously. And so, and when after a tragedy, when groups kind of, retreat to their own corners, I think it was more productive to have a conversation. And on the night of that tragedy, and I'm sure this was the same for Speaker Craddick, I was getting messages from constituents saying, how come we didn't have an active shooter alert situation that could have warned us to stay away from the area or to take cover or shelter in place. And then in the aftermath of the shooting, as I worked with family members of the victims and some of the survivors, that was one issue that everybody could coalesce around. And if that's a way to save lives without infringing on the rights of law-abiding Texans, then that's something that I'm very supportive of, and that's why we're making a push for it. And law enforcement is behind it. I mean, it's something that everybody has been able to get behind as a life-saving measure. So it's a way to increase public safety. It's a way to increase transparency, and that's why I think that this was not only a good approach to take, but the best approach to take, and something that we can actually get done.
Thank you, Representative Craddick.
Well, I think Second Amendment rights, we get more mail on that probably than anything else. We do a questionnaire before the session starts, and it's our comments section. You almost don't have to read it because that's really where most of the comments are done. And I think Brooks is right to the aspect about the alert system. I think it's something we could do, should do, and it shouldn't be that hard. And so I think you'll see that set up and done. And I think that's a key effort in this area. And I don't see any Second Amendment rights being altered to any great extent during this session. I may be wrong. I think we're going to vote on some gun bills next week on the floor, or the week after that. We're split up in calendars to look at. So I think it's something that a lot of people are looking at, but most of them just don't want any changes of any drastic measure. But I think the alert system is the key that we will do this session.
Well, thank you both for your answers and your insight. On behalf of the Midland and Odessa Chambers of Commerce, we want to thank you both for your time today and for providing the update and your diligent work for our communities down in Austin. So thank you both very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye. Now, to get back on schedule, it didn't take us long to get a little behind. We've got a 15-minute or so networking break. If you look over on the left-hand side of your screen, you can see a button that says networking. It's an opportunity for go in, and you'll sort of be tossed around and have an opportunity to meet and discuss with other members of the Midland Odessa Chamber of Commerce and participants here today, and network in that period of time. We'll come back at 10:15, about 15 minutes here, with United States Congressman August Fluker. Thank you.